Hi, everyone. I'm Sarika Agrawal, co-founder of the Brain Foundation, which is a US-based nonprofit that supports translational research and biopharma companies developing evidence-based therapeutics for autism and neurodevelopmental disorders. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Howard Weisman, CEO of PaxMedica, to our webcast today. For those of you who don't know, PaxMedica is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company that is developing innovative solutions for unmet needs in neurodevelopmental disorders. Their lead program in autism is based on Suramin, a 100-year-old drug that has been traditionally used to treat African sleeping sickness and river blindness. So welcome, Howard. Thank you for making the time to join us today.
Thank you, Sarika. I'm very happy to be here and look forward to having a discussion about my favorite topic, PaxMedica.
Yes, absolutely, Howard. Now, I'm thinking it's probably been like a little over 2 years since we've known each other, and through our partnership that we've had between PaxMedica and the Brain Foundation. I know you've been a founder and CEO of several successful pharma and medical device companies. So tell us a little bit more about what led you to join PaxMedica as CEO.
Sure. Well, first of all, I knew Michael Derby, one of the founders, from my travels as an entrepreneur in the industry. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry my whole career, but I started out, of course, in the big pharmaceutical companies. But 20 some odd years ago, I met Michael, and I actually reconnected with him in 2019 when I was getting out of my last operating job for a company that we were running up in Boston, and looking for something challenging, and had never really considered seeing Suramin again. But when I saw Michael, I heard about the Suramin idea. The last time I saw Suramin was actually in 1994. When I was a brand new director of new products at Park Davis, a US drug company, and that was our lead drug at the time, but it was for cancer, not for autism. So I was absolutely, surprised, if you will, that Michael had found this new use. I met with him several times. I started to read all of the work by Professor Naviaux, and then heard about the business plan. And I told him, I said, I want to help you. I have to help you. And so I forced myself on him in many ways, because he didn't really have a CEO. He wasn't sure where they were going to take the company. And I said, no, this is the time. We have to do it, because you're ready. I'm here. And it really was just like that. And the most interesting thing was that I began the role of CEO on March 15th of 2020, right at the beginning of the shutdown. So we didn't see each other for 2 years. But since we had some working knowledge of each other and trust and a common mission, because for us, bringing these types of opportunities in drug development to the fore, and as entrepreneurs bringing them forward, it's if we don't do it, frankly, nobody will. And
absolutely. Wow. Now that's an incredible backstory, and talk about taking the helm of a company just at the start of the pandemic. I mean, amazing challenge that I'm sure that it must have presented for you. But coming back to what you were saying about your past experience with Suramin and Dr. Naviaux. Now, I know many in our community are very familiar with that groundbreaking research that was published by Dr. Naviaux at UC San Diego around cell danger response, antipurinergic therapy, and that successful phase 1 study of Suramin and autism. But just for the benefit of those who are new to this and not as well versed with the science, could you please explain in simple terms what that research was about?
That is a tall order in simple terms. It is a complex disorder, autism. Yes, the cause of it is probably multifactorial. We're not looking at the cause of the disorder. We're actually looking at why does the disorder produce the symptoms that it produces. And what Professor Naviaux was also looking for was some, if you will, insight into these through metabolism and energy production. And his work was centered around that for many, many years. And then his ability to sort of create a structure around what might be happening here to produce these symptoms led him to look to the purine signaling cascade, which is what I call it. And it is part of our immune system. It's part of everything that we do. It is what produces the energy for fight and flight mechanisms. It's what produces the energy for immune responses. And those things are what keep us alive as humans. Sometimes the pattern can be disrupted somehow. Maybe by genetics, maybe by toxins, maybe by illness. And when that happens, purine signaling can change. And it can change in a way that causes injury rather than causing healing. And that's where his work was focused. And what he was looking for was a way to interfere with that purine cascade and see if that would have any outcome in change of symptomatology. First, he tested this in animals. You can take animals and you can give them a disorder, right? And you produce a specimen. And he was able to show that when the animals had their purine signaling mechanisms temporarily blocked, that their symptoms changed. And then he made the huge leap and got permission to test it in 10 boys. And that was really the breakthrough. What he was trying to do very simply was to stop that reaction from overreacting, right? It's supposed to be there, but sometimes in some people, for whatever reason, it's always there. It's never in a resting stage. It's always in a attacking stage. This is the cell danger response that he described. Others have described it as the innate immune function. Whatever way you describe it, in these individuals, it seems to just be going on all the time. So he tested these boys and he found that the ones that actually had the drug, because it was placebo children and drug-treated children, had a profound change in symptoms. And the explanation could only be provided by purine signaling because this drug blocks the purine receptor. That's what it's known to do. And so with that, he published it. And then we picked up that line of the story in 2018. I say we, PaxMedica did. In 2018, when the company was founded, Michael really, he read the literature, he read the paper, and immediately went to work trying to see if he could help solve the biggest problem of all, which is, where do you get Suramin?
Wow. Absolutely. I remember when that paper by Dr. Naviaux was published in 2017, there was such incredible excitement amongst many of us in the autism community. And then, yes, we heard about, formation of PaxMedica around just a year after. And, what's incredible to me is the story that I've heard about how Michael and founders, the challenges they ran into after the formation of the companies and how they overcome that. And I'd love for our community kind of to hear that straight from you as well.
Sure. Well, as you know, Suramin has been used for a very long time to treat a deadly parasite, which thankfully is very rare. And it's considered to be one of the rarest parasites still known to kill humans. If you're infected with this parasite and you don't get treated with Suramin while the parasite's still replicating in your bloodstream, very high chance, almost 100%, that it will be a fatal outcome, and within months. There are other forms of sleeping sickness caused by other parasites. Only this parasite, this particular one, reacts and responds to Suramin in that stage, and that's why it's been around for as long as it has. At one point, this was a very common parasite in East Africa, but now 100 years later, with better crop control, with better, animal control, better people control, these parasites are not transmitted to humans as often. In fact, there's usually only maybe 10 or 12 cases per year. The WHO actually controls the supply of Suramin in the world right now. Michael knew that in 2018, and he traveled to Africa and he met with some of the ministers of health of some of these East African countries. And over a period of several weeks, developed a relationship with them, told them what his plans were, and how possibly could he get some assistance from the WHO. I mean, as entrepreneurs, we sometimes go into these situations with a very vague idea of what's really there, and you just start asking questions and meeting people and listening to the answers, and waiting for that spark. And I think the spark really was that in the United States, Congress many years ago put together a program for neglected rare tropical disease drugs to be approved by the FDA under special circumstances so they could be added to the stockpile for our nation's preparedness in case there is an outbreak of some epidemic. Nobody would expect this particular parasite to come here, and yet this parasite is actually on that list. Out of all the different parasites and known bacteria and viruses that are rare, neglected, tropical, this particular parasite is on that list. There's only one drug that is known to treat it effectively, and that's Suramin. And that's the WHO says that. And as a result, they control the supply of Suramin. And when somebody gets infected in Africa, the ministries of health have the drug on supply. Somebody gets infected in the United States, maybe because they traveled to Africa and came back with a parasite infection. That patient has to have their doctor get in touch with the CDC. The CDC has to get in touch with the WHO. WHO has to get in touch with the ministries of health, find the drug, and ship it through these various channels. There have been cases where patients have nearly died waiting for it. It's not a very good system, which is why the federal government set up this program to inspire and also to frankly incentivize entrepreneurs and other drug companies to take the challenge. Not easy. When you take a drug through to the US FDA, you have to have efficacy, right? Safety, that's important too, but in an infectious disease that's deadly and rare, how can you possibly run a clinical trial? So Michael went to the FDA with a very good team of lawyers and physicians, and they've gained agreement at least on certain principles about how we will analyze data from Africa of treated patients over the past 20 years, whose records we have exclusive rights to through those governments, right? So we've gotten permission. We've had a team for about 6 months now in those countries, in Uganda and Malawi, collecting these records from the sleeping sickness hospitals, which do not look like modern hospitals in the US by any stretch of the imagination. But yet these are good, earnest people who kept medical records of the patients they treated. And we'll gather those records, present them to the FDA as our efficacy study. And that'll take us a few more months to get that all together. But once we do that, then we're going to be in the process of taking this drug for the very first time to the US FDA for approval for its 100-year, well-described, well-documented use officially for approval here. That program has one very important feature, which is an incentive that's provided to do this, which is that the US market will be exclusively awarded to whatever company brings that molecule to the US first. And it can be for anything. The fastest route, we think, is for this African sleeping sickness because the data exists. We have agreement with the FDA, and it is part of a program that the federal government has created a pathway that the FDA follows and has followed in the past. The other part of this is to be able to successfully make the drug. I mentioned to you that the drug is not available outside of the WHO, and that's because they have the only supply. It's made for them by the original maker, Bayer, and Bayer makes it on a custom order basis every few years. There aren't that many cases, so they don't have to make very much drug. The process that we're deploying right now will actually be the first commercial supply of Suramin in the world.
Wow, that was an incredible story. I mean, the creativity that Michael and team kind of employed here to figure out the source of Suramin in the time frame and find a path to FDA, because I know one of the frustrating things for patients often is the time it takes to take any drug from early stages to FDA approval. And he figured out such a creative way to cut short that process.
Well, that's what impressed me. I didn't mean to talk over you, but that was what impressed me when I first heard about his plan. And you know, I wouldn't say that I have done the things that he's done here, but that is what it does take, is this attitude of if I don't figure it out, nobody else will. And if I can
Absolutely.
figure it out, then I have to do it. And
Absolutely.
that's where I came in and said, well, I've got to do it with you.
And I think that sets the culture of the company. It's, this, it's as much of an urgency for you as it is for people in our community. And I will tell you that's what really drew us to want to partner with PaxMedica. It's your drive to action. But then I know as soon as you take over and you join as CEO, the pandemic starts and brings the entire world to a standstill. I know that so much of our research that we had funded through our grants kind of had to slow down or even stop. But you guys still keep marching on. And you figured out a way to even conduct a phase 2 trial in autism in the year 2020 in South Africa. Tell us how that came about.
Well, we actually started the trial in 2019 before
I see.
And that was a key because we recruited about 2/3 of the patients by the time South Africa went into their first lockdown. So for about 3 months, from April through June, we actually couldn't recruit any more patients. And patients who we had recruited up until that point who were maybe finishing out the trial, but then got locked down, we had to exclude them. I think we restarted the trial in August or September of 2020 because by that point they were reopening South Africa and people could move freely. It was still a risk, so we said, well, let's try to see if we can recruit the rest. And then we decided to recruit more because we knew we were going to lose some of these. We were fortunate, I think, that the CRO we used was from South Africa. They were physicians in South Africa. And, you end up with some patients who didn't get back to the clinic at the end of the trial, so they can't be used for evaluation. You can use them maybe for intent to treat, but you can't use them for the protocol evaluation and seeing how people did. There were a lot of risks involved with it, so it wasn't easy, but somehow we did manage to recruit the last 14 or 15 patients between September and the following, I think it was January or so, and finished them up. And we were fortunate. Then of course in 2021, the world changed dramatically again because we were all getting vaccinated. But we were able to actually just with a lot of hand-holding, frankly, and just keeping our eye on the ball the whole time, get there. One of the success stories, if you will, of the pandemic.
Oh, absolutely, no doubt. And in fact, the cherry on top was that the results were very positive from the trial. Tell us a little bit more about the kind of new information you learned from that trial.
Well, I think, first of all, when Professor Naviaux did his trial, he started with a dose that came out of the actual parasite treatment, and it's the initial dose that you give somebody when they're infected. The difference was that he only gave one dose, right? When you have the infection, you get this dose every 3 or 4 days for a month, right? So what he had shown in his trial was that a single injection actually seemed to have an effect for 3 or 4 weeks out because the drug has a very long half-life. That we all knew. In our trial, we weren't sure if that was the right dose. So we did a kind of a classic thing. We just used half that dose and that dose. We report mostly on the half that dose, which was 10 milligrams per kilogram, because that's where we got profoundly good results in our minds, meaning that we had a signal. It wasn't statistically significant, but we had a strong enough signal in that group versus the group that had the original 20 milligrams per kilogram didn't have as strong a signal. And we learned that it's probably better to use, if you're going to use it sequentially, the lower dose because the half-life is significant. it will last for 30 to 40 days in the body. So we learned a couple things. We learned the dosing, and we learned the length of time that's probably appropriate in between doses, at least in what we observed in our trial.
Got it. And what kind of side effects were seen?
Well, we saw a few side effects that were well known that you see in patients being treated for the infection. One of them is a rash, and it's a rash that looks a bit like a sunburn, usually somewhere on the torso, front or back. Happens a couple of days after infusion, and it may last for 4 or 5 days and it resolves. We also saw some nausea and vomiting on the day of infusion. The rate in the 20 milligrams per kilogram group, that larger group, the original dosing group, they actually had all of those. About a third of them had those types of reactions, all self-limiting. Nothing was therapeutically, like we call it, there were no side effects that limited therapy, okay? We had in our 10 milligram per kilogram dose group, those side effects did not show up. I think we had one person with a rash, one person had nausea. Everybody else had, benign or not reportable side effects. In our placebo group, where we had an equal numbers, we had, I think, 14, 14, and 14, something like that, or 15, 14, and 15. Equally matched group, the placebo group, also a third of them had a rash, a third of them had vomiting. And that was the big surprise, actually, for me, because we were worried about rash being a well-known side effect of this drug. And we were doing this trial in South Africa. And we had to, in the informed consent, you say, these are the things that could happen to you. So rash was an obvious one. And we know that parents might have looked for the rash. But the response in the group that didn't have the rash was the strongest response of the three. So there was no way they could have known that those children actually received the drug or which dose they received. And then the second thing that we looked at, which is this scale we use as a secondary measure, called the clinical global impression scale of improvement. For that lower dose group, the 10 milligram group, they actually had a statistically significant improvement from the beginning to the end of the trial. That was a big surprise too. So all of these things for us said there is more signal than noise here, and to our advisors, when they looked at it, they said, this is a psychoactive drug, meaning that behavior changed. So therefore, this has an impact. They weren't describing the mechanism. They were describing the effect, the change in behavior. And that's what we measured.
Wow, that's great to hear about the positive signal that you saw in the results. Now, one of the things that came to our mind was that the trial that Dr. Naviaux did, and it was a small trial, it was only 5 kids, but the anecdotal reports from that showed that there were kids who didn't have speech. They started talking after that, or they were talking a lot more. And then I noticed that your phase 2 trial didn't explicitly track for speech. Can you give us a little bit insight into the endpoints that you chose and why you chose them?
Sure. Well, first, I will say I read that about Professor Naviaux's trials too, and that is a very exciting possibility. I really do think it's a possibility. In the drug development that we're doing, we're following as best we can some guidelines that the FDA has outlined for other companies. One of the scales that we've seen used, that the FDA has approved drugs based on, is called the Aberrant Behavior Checklist, adjusted for autism. And in that particular checklist, you have 5 categories: irritability, hyperactivity, social avoidance, stereotypical behavior, and inappropriate speech. We looked at a lot of different other tracking types of questionnaires, but our advisors and I think even the FDA at this point now too, having seen our results, agrees that this is a reason. The ABC adjusted for autism is a reasonable scale to use to track change in a clinical trial. Okay, So what Professor Naviaux did was a clinical trial, but it was a single injection and measured a single point in time an outcome. And those anecdotal reports, of course, very important because parents are at home and they're seeing these changes and they're talking about it. We didn't have that kind of access to our patients and their families. We use these instruments through the investigators, and the investigators collected that data. And then at the end of the trial, we see the data. That's the only time we ever see the data, is the very end of the trial. We did get some anecdotal reports about behavioral changes that might indicate that speech had changed and improved in these children. In fact, we saw many of those, but none of it is really reportable, if you will, as part of a clinical trial. There's no mechanism to do that, especially when you're using an instrument like an ABC, or I mentioned earlier, the Clinical Global Impression Scale. Those are validated instruments that the FDA has in the past accepted as evidence of efficacy. It's exciting to think about children being able to talk if they were nonverbal, but it also is confounding in a clinical trial sometimes to actually include those children. We had some of those children in our trial, and there were some of the instruments that we used that they couldn't complete. And it wasn't clear to us whether the instrument was not good or it was because the child is nonverbal. And so these are the complexities of clinical trials you only get when you do them, right? Everything's very interesting in theory, but then when you actually run the trial, the practical implication of the trial is you don't have forever to study these children. You have a limited time period. So you want to use the most effective FDA-accepted endpoints that you think are measurable in this population and get it approved under that. Yes, there might be other changes that people see over time when they use the drug in actual practice. We're trying to create a moment in time where we structure it very carefully, because that's what the FDA requires, so that the data has as little bias as possible. And so that we can run statistics on that and say, yes, in this trial, we observed this effect. And we know it was real because statistically, it was validated, statistically significant. If we had gotten that out of the 44 boys that we tested, when I think only 27 of them were on actual drug, the rest were on placebo, if we'd gotten a statistically significant ABC outcome, that would have been very exciting. We still would have had to do another trial. And that's where we're headed.
Yeah, I think that's really very interesting context, I think, for people to understand that that when results get reported from any clinical trial, the specific lens through which one has to view it is often impacted by or related to how the FDA requires the company to run that trial. So thanks, that was helpful to understand. But now it's been 2 years since that trial was published, I think in 2021. Tell us what's been going on since then.
Well, a couple things. You may be aware that the capital markets have been in turmoil.
Yes,
we get our original funding actually came from Michael's investment firm, Tartamid Sciences, and they actually supported the company for the first three and a half years. And we've raised some small amounts of capital from other private investors along the way. And in 2021, we believe that with the data from this trial, we might be able to convince investors to back us in a public offering. We did try that, and in the second half of 2021, the capital markets really went into it's a bear market, I guess that's what people call it. And it's been in that situation for a long time, made funding very difficult for us to get. However, we did finally do that in August. We went public. We raised enough funds between that public offering and some subsequent financings later on last fall that we were able to actually advance our program in two specific ways. One is we have to make the drug in large quantity, and we have to make it in a way that the FDA will approve it as a commercial drug. So in the past, we've made small quantities of the drug. Now we're making large quantities of the drug. That costs a lot of money to do. So that's what we've been doing. So for the last year and a half, we have been working our way towards production of Suramin to be shown to the FDA as evidence that we can make the drug reproducibly and safely and provide it as a commercial product after we filed for our approval. It's a very important step. And for a small company, of course, we work through external parties. We have contract manufacturing organizations that work with us to develop the process, to qualify the process, to make sure that it can be reproduced every single time the same way. And then also to finish the product and make it presentable. You have, different forms of products. Ours is an injectable form, so it has to be made and put into a vial. That's actually a different manufacturer who does that work. So first we make the drug and then we have to package it. So that's been going on for the last year. The other part of what we've been doing is actually working with our scientific advisors, meeting with the FDA, and planning out our next trial for autism. So that takes a long time. This is a complicated, it's a complicated clinical trial to run. We just talked about some of the nuances in these trials and why they do take a long time to develop. But more importantly, we need our drug available to run those trials. So in the meantime, though, we are working on the drug approval, right? And the drug approval is for the human African trypanosomiasis infection. That's actually first up. We'll get the drug approved for that very much likely well before it's approved for autism. But again, the reason to do that is to have the ability to make the drug available here in the US and to have enough incentives in the system that we can continue to afford to run clinical trials in autism.
What key questions then, as you go forward, does the FDA want to see answered before Suramin can be made available to people here in the United States? I know you have the HAT trial, right? The HAT indication, but for the autism portion of your work, what do they want to see answered?
Safety is first. That's, just it sometimes is overlooked, but safety is the most important element of an FDA review. We are continuing to do what we call preclinical toxicology studies. We do a lot of genetic toxicology studies. We're doing reproductive toxicology studies. We don't do these in humans, of course. We either do them on a bench or we do use animal studies. These are required by the FDA to make sure not just that we see the efficacy, but we know enough about the potential safety in humans from those studies. We'll continue to work on those. They have probably another several months to a year to go before they're all completed. Generally, you have to present enough data in time to be able to expose humans to these drugs. This is an unusual case because humans have used this drug for 100 years. So you say, well, why do you have to do all that work?
Mm-hmm.
This has never been done. It's never actually been done. So we can't just go to the FDA and say, look at all the people who were saved with sleeping sickness. Can we use it in autism here? Not without the safety background. So we spend a lot of our time and resources right now for autism just looking at safety. The efficacy piece of that, we're pretty comfortable how to proceed here, right? But again, it still has to be done. That work has to be done. And the FDA is more comfortable with biomarker endpoints these days than they are with qualified, validated questionnaire endpoints. But we're not able to produce an endpoint. Nobody has shown us a biomarker endpoint that's reliable in autism, and I think there's a lot of people working on that, but we don't have one. Therefore, the FDA doesn't have one either. So I think that's part of the long-term piece, and that's why you have to repeat studies, because when you're using these types of instruments, you have to repeat the study and make sure that you can reproduce the result. And I think that, for our standpoint, if the drug at least can be presented as safe to use in the manner we're using it in, then the efficacy that we can see and observe in that trial that we do next is going to be the important next step. The FDA's approach, I think, in general, always is to protect patients, and our job is to help patients. Nobody can help patients if you're presenting something that isn't safe. but it does sort of put us a little bit at odds because we're always looking for the efficacy signal in the absence of a safety signal. They're always looking for the safety signal. Who cares about efficacy? If it's not safe, game over. And a lot of drugs do get stopped because of that. So that's what we focus on, and we're going to deliver to the FDA a package for autism that we're comfortable exposing people to. The approval will be in sleeping sickness while we're developing it for autism. And it's a careful education of the FDA as we move from the infectious disease division to the psychiatry division to demonstrate why this drug deserves to be used in US patients who want to try it. And if we don't produce the evidence for that, nobody else will.
Right. And then do you think that, giving more than 3 doses may be able to further improve the disabling symptoms of autism? I know your trial was 3.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's something that clinical trial work really helps to try to elucidate. Again, a lot of that's driven by how much safety data we have at any particular time. So I think we'll see if we can do longer duration trials. It'll be because we have more safety data. And I'd like to see that because we just don't know the answer to that question.
Right.
We've seen that in sequential doses during our trial, those 3 doses, we saw continued and sustained improvements in those categories that we measured in that 10 milligram per kilogram group. But I don't know if it gets better after that, or if you just sustain at this new plateau. Those are questions we hope to answer later. But it may be that the actual clinical world out there, people are actually treating these patients every single day, they might find that out, which does happen a lot of times.
Sure. No, absolutely. Another question that we tend to get a lot is related to this cell danger response that, if Suramin is working by turning off the cell danger response, could it possibly, through multiple doses, lead to undesirable changes related to immune activation in the long run? Like too much of a good thing may be a bad thing.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I think if you're using it, well, it's all about the use case. So if you're using it to treat African trypanosomiasis, sleeping sickness, where you're trying to kill a parasite before it enters the brain, right? It's in the bloodstream, it's replicating, Suramin circulates around and eliminates this parasite. That's a very aggressive dosing process because you're racing against time. And so in that case, it is so profoundly different than what we're doing for autism. And yet within that, we do understand certain things about the drug. It causes a rash in those patients too, right? So we saw it in our patients. That means that even a small amount of the drug could cause a rash. Is it meaningful? Well, only if the rash actually was a serious safety problem. It goes away and we didn't even see it in the lower dose group. So maybe there is a threshold for that to be produced. It is also possible we might find out in the future that even a smaller dose of Suramin could have an effect on these behavioral symptoms. And this is the whole point of clinical, discovery, and that's why it takes so long. We want to get the best effect we can with the smallest amount of drug. We know what the most amount of drug does. It can save your life if you get infected with this parasite. But that's not what we're really studying here. So, a lot of this will certainly it will evolve, but in the case of what Naviaux postulated with cell danger response, turning off the mechanism is not what we're doing. Some people would say we're down regulating the mechanism. Cell danger response is not shutting off, as Naviaux likes to say. The immune system's in overdrive. So trying to put some brakes on it is really what Suramin is doing, not stopping the car altogether.
Right. And I think that, I'm glad you brought that distinction out. And then the flip side to that is when you stop dosing Suramin, will the results sustain and continue? right? And that's probably something yet we have to find out through clinical trials.
Yeah, right. And Bob, our trial and Professor Naviaux's trial, also at the end of the trial, the last 6 weeks, we could see the trailing off of the effect. We haven't followed up with any of our trial participants to know if they continued back to their baseline or not, but that would be expected, I think. But again, we have a lot of work to do ahead of us to answer that specific question. The durability of the response, the sustainability of the response with and without drug, right? Because there are certainly some scenarios in other disease cases where you use a drug and it somehow changes the chemistry enough that the body recovers. Infectious diseases like that in many ways.
Right.
We treat really the host in infectious disease. Yes, the bacteria is being attacked, but ultimately it's your immune system that recovers you. Our feeling is that this is a situation where the immune system is in overdrive.
Right, and I think that's one of the key challenges for any chronic disease, right? And how it's different from infectious disease.
Right.
But how long, given what coming ahead, how long do you think this whole process to get to FDA approval might take? Just what are the key milestones, and approximately what can people expect of, hey, in this year, I may be able to access Suramin because it will be FDA approved by then?
Well, for us right now, we are working to get the drug approved for African sleeping sickness.
Yep.
If we continue to track to our timelines, which we will do, if that continues on for the next year or so, we hope to file sometime in the middle of next year. I would say second half of 24 is probably a good target. And we're hoping to get approved fairly quickly. I would say the drug approval for HAT could come in early 25. Late 24 to early 25 is kind of a good working range for that right now, based on what we know. We will be running some autism trials before that approval. That much I am sure of, that before that drug gets approved, there will be autism trials up and running. But I would say that an autism indication would have to come after the HAT indication. So it would be after 2025 for autism, which seems like a long way away, but it's actually a couple of years away, but it'll be after HAT. That's the best I can tell you right now. And then it depends on how well do the trials read out, how many trials do we have to do to satisfy the FDA's and our own interest in making sure that we know the dosing and we know who should get the drug too, right? These are all parts of the process that we work through almost every day, in trying to think about how do we make sure that we've done everything we possibly can to accelerate the programs, number one, and number two, make them broadly available to people who actually want to participate. And that's a challenge, because it's all driven by data.
What about approval outside the US? Is that on plans for you? Seeking approval for Suramin for autism indication?
It is, but I'm not really going to reveal where we're looking at next for competitive reasons, strategic reasons, and also because we are not spending any resource money right now in some of those places. We will later on. We have filed for patents around the world. So we have several patent families for Suramin that are under review in every jurisdiction. So, time will tell where we can go next with it. But, we're here in the US. The FDA has this great program for tropical diseases that really benefit us and benefit the autism community, because without that, I don't know how this drug would actually come to the US market. It would be hard.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And that certainly has accelerated this whole process for autism. In fact, one question that, I wanted to ask is, after the HAT approval comes through, what kind of possibilities do you see for like an expanded access trial for autism happening on grounds of compassionate use?
I think we'll look at that. I need to have drug first to even consider There's a lot of possibilities there. And again, we're open to all of those ideas. We just haven't been able to really to do any of them, frankly, because, first things first, we have to be sure that we can make the drug safely and reproducibly. We're doing that right now. Secondly, we have to have enough data that we can tell a physician what they're going to do with the drug, right? How to use the drug.
Mm-hmm. We're
getting there too. I think all of those are really great ideas, but again, the safety of an individual in an expanded access program is just as important as the safety of an individual in a clinical trial.
Right.
So what we want to make sure of is that we're focused on the clinical trial first and foremost, because we need that data. If there's a possibility through expanded access to, after the drug's been approved here in the US, to have patients get the drug, of course, we'd want to try to help them in any way we can. And you hope that, the regulations that are out there right now that help companies, help families through expanded access are still there. So we're probably, a couple of years away from having that direct conversation with the community, but it is something we're thinking about every day, because we know that once we have the drug available, people are going to want to get access to it. And we want to make sure that they do, but in the safest manner possible.
Sure. And just the fact that you're willing to consider that, I think that just means a lot for the community. And absolutely, safety is of paramount importance, and that comes first. And also having all the other relevant clinical data. In fact, one of the things we keep hearing about, and these are anecdotal reports that we hear about, and sometimes it's concerning. We hear parents saying that, there are private suppliers for Suramin in other countries. Should I just go get it from them? We also hear people talking about natural sources, pine needles being available. Any comment on that?
I think that would be probably unlikely that it would be true, but I don't know. And with regard to getting it somewhere else, what I can tell you, we've been working on the manufacturing of this drug, the synthesis of this drug, for well over 3-4 years. It is a hard drug to make. It is doesn't look like any other drug that the pharmaceutical industry makes now. The ingredients that we use also don't look like other drugs in the industry, so those are custom made. The process is actually something that we've developed very carefully, trying to see if there was an easier way to make it, but there isn't. And the end product is an injectable. It's going straight into your veins. I wouldn't put anything into my veins if I didn't know that it was made by a qualified manufacturer, tested, approved by the FDA, approved by some regulatory authority before I put it in me or anybody else. It's not a benign medicine. So I think anybody who's saying that they're getting it from some other source, pine needles or otherwise, I think it's a bad idea to just go ahead and think that that's something that can be safe to use. On the other hand, with a little bit of patience, we will have a very high quality product out there. That's what we're working on, and we just hope that we can do it as fast as we possibly can and get it out to people and they'll know that that's been made through a quality pharmaceutical manufacturing process and know where it came from.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for that word of caution. Do no harm. That's sort of the number one rule in any kind of treatment to pursue. So thanks for sharing more details about that. Finally, what do you think can individuals and parents and organizations in the autism community do to support PaxMedica and its mission? I mean, you are doing such a tremendous job, and there's so much to do going forwards. What can we do to help?
Well, Sarika, we're a public company. We're listed on the NASDAQ. Our symbol's PXMD. You can come visit our website at PaxMedica.com. There's some information there that might be helpful to some of the audience here. But frankly, we want to hear from you. One of the reasons why we really genuinely, like having this relationship with Brain Foundation is because it does connect us to the families that are out there that we really need to hear from. So what really helps us is to is to understand, like we have been getting emails and such from families, what it is like to be in dealing with this on a, as we are, because we need that energy to help people. So we need to hear from the audience. We need to hear from the audience. So I say the families that are affected here through Brain Foundation, because obviously you bring a credibility, if you will, to the conversation. And that's important for us. We want to be involved in the dialogue as we bring this drug through the various stages of clinical development. And without input from the community out there, it's hard for us to know if we're helping anybody.
So Howard, there's, I guess, no doubt if I look at the Q&A box to know how much the community is rallying in support of what the work that PaxMedica is doing. But I want us to now go from this recorded section to our live interview, which where I want you to tell us and everybody else who's listening to this for some exciting news that was unveiled this week. So go ahead.
Right. So earlier this week, we announced that we have applied for a new clinical trial to start in South Africa. I wish it was in the United States, but it is in South Africa. And we applied to the South African Regulatory Authority, which is called SAHPRA. That trial, we hope, will begin in the fall. We'll have some more information about that later this summer. There will be some postings on clinicaltrials.gov, but we'll also make some announcements later on about what that trial is going to entail. It's very exciting for us. This will be the first trial we have conducted in 2 years, and it will be in children with autism. We're very hopeful that the government in South Africa will allow us to do the second trial there.
Oh, no, absolutely. We are all very excited about that. But I was wondering if you could share some more details. Number one question that I wanted to ask is, your last trial was also in South Africa, and we love that the autism community in South Africa has the chance to participate in 2 of these trials. But can you explain a bit about why you chose South Africa again?
Well, it's really a very good host country for us for a few very specific reasons. Suramin is actually approved there to treat African sleeping sickness. So they have physicians who have used the drug there, know the drug. The government is comfortable running trials in other indications as a result. And that there's an efficiency there for us because in the US, there is no such approval. So in the US, I explained earlier that we are running a battery of animal tests and benchtop tests that are required to bring the drug to the FDA, even for an investigational new drug application. A tremendous amount of work goes into that. So in South Africa, that is not necessary. And so as a host country, they allow us to explore these new indications, provided that their citizens can get some benefit from it. So they like to see efficacy trials, and that's what we're running.
Okay, well, wonderful. And there were a lot of questions that I saw in our Q&A box as well. What would be your inclusion criteria? Anything you could say about exclusion in terms of comorbidities?
Yeah, well, I will say this as a caveat just up front. We've submitted a protocol. All regulatory authorities have an opportunity to adjust those protocols through a Q&A process, which we have not yet gone through. We're a few weeks away from that. But what we submitted for is a trial with 30 subjects. There'll be 3 groups, 2 treated groups and 1 placebo group. It's really important to run placebo-controlled trials in this population. They will receive more than 1 dose, but not more than 3. So it will not be beyond what we've done before. And we'll also be moving the time between doses around a little bit. We're going to be taking some very precise measures during this trial that we really couldn't do in a much larger trial. The FDA has suggested that we do these before we were to do the larger trial, but they also offered us to do it during the larger trial. So we're really trying to refine what I talked about earlier. What is the most effective dose that we can get to that's also the lowest dose? And so that's part of what this trial will reveal.
Got it. What about age groups?
It'll be, actually, we're breaking this into 3 age groups. That was another part of the FDA feedback, was to see if there's any difference in how the drug is metabolized by a 4-year-old versus a 17-year-old. So we have age groups will range from 4 to 17, but we'll have them in 3 distinct groups of 4 to 8, 9 to 12, and 13 to 17. So we'll have a picture of each of those groups on in all 3 groups. Also, both boys and girls will be allowed in this trial, and I think those are the sort of the key features of that particular trial. It's 3 centers in South Africa.
Okay, and what information do you hope to get from this trial that you did not get from the last trial that you did?
Well, I think we're going to confirm whether or not that lower dose of 10 mg per kg is the right dose for most people. And the precise measurements we're going to take essentially are to see if we can describe in children, which has never been done, what the pharmacokinetics are, which that's a long word for describing how long does it take and what does the drug do when you inject into somebody, how long does it take to do what it does. So all drugs have a concentration peak that they reach after they're given, and then they have a tailing off of drug and then the loss of the effect. And so because this is a very long half-life drug, it can last for 30 or 40 days in some individuals. We want to know very precisely whether it is 30 or 40 days in children too. Nobody's seen that. Nobody's looked at that before. So that's part of what we have to learn in this trial, which is really important for us to do sequential dosing. It's not just about the first dose. It's about the second dose, the third dose, and possibly a 4th dose. And we have to know exactly how long it takes this drug to get to a point where it's no longer effective, and therefore you can redose.
Yeah. A number of our community members for Brain are in the US, but they're also all in many other countries around the world. I mean, today's registration just showed that. And obviously, we have families in many other countries and regions of the world looking for, trials and access to trials. Any plans of, having trials in other countries?
Yes, when we file an IND for Suramin in autism in the US, we will likely, not definitely, but likely file in some countries in Europe. Maybe, we may pick 1 or 2. Running global trials is complex. We're a very small company. We are based on the East Coast of the United States. We have no employees outside of the United States. And so we will also be looking for partners to help us, other drug companies that may be situated in Europe. That's all to come in the future. First and foremost, we need to file an IND with the FDA and get that ball rolling. And generally, it's the same material that we would have to submit to a European regulatory agency. As far as other parts beyond that, there may be other ways of people participating in their home countries through other means, and I don't mean to be too vague here, but getting access to medicines outside of the US is a very different process than getting access to medicines inside the US. But everywhere in the world, for this drug, availability of the actual drug in a pharmaceutical form that's been made in what we would call a good manufacturing practice, FDA approvable facility, that's been the hard part. The drug's just not available.
Yeah.
Once it's available, that all changes. And that's why I say outside of the US, even outside of Europe, that could be greatly impacted by what we do.
Got it. Okay. And I know it takes a lot of funding as well to make some of these trials happen, and resources for PaxMedica. And I see in the Q&A box a great amount of interest that many of our attendees and community members have in supporting PaxMedica. And I just want to say that one of the things we could consider in the time being is perhaps to have a fundraiser through Brain with the community and be able to raise funds. We do that for a number of other treatment trials with other drugs. So hopefully that's one path. But I'm sure there may be more such avenues as well to support PaxMedica.
Sure. Well, we are a public company, so we derive our funding directly from the capital markets, and we're NASDAQ listed. The reason why we decided to do that is we wanted to be able to control our own destiny. I've run a number of different companies, mostly private companies. I've worked for large public companies, but this has been a really critical component of our company formation, which without the company, the trials can't be done. And without the trials, of course, there's no filings. So the process of financing the company through the capital markets in the US gives us a lot of different options for raising money when we need it. So for instance, we didn't raise money to do a 200-person trial in autism yet, but we will be able to once we've been able to demonstrate to investors how well we're doing on our other milestones associated with sleeping sickness and making the drug in the first place. So all of those, sort of future milestones for us are fundraising opportunities. We hope we're near one soon again, but have to watch the announcements, and that's generally how public companies operate. We try to reach a milestone, we can tell investors about it, and then we let them know what the future means now and what it's going to cost and how they can help us get there. But we are certainly grateful for any work that Brain Foundation can do for us in terms of helping some of these families, because the cost of these trials is one thing, but it also costs families money too, to participate in trials. And so having groups like the Brain Foundation can really help, because sometimes that is an important offset that even the drug company doesn't know about and probably can't help very much with. The trials themselves are very expensive, it's true, but the cost of the trial's impact on a family is an expense that we don't capture, and Brain Foundation may be able to help there.
No, absolutely, sure. And it's been great partnering with you over the last 2 years, and I hope we can continue to support in such ways that you describe. And I also want to encourage our viewers to make sure that they subscribe for more information related to this. So please go to brainfoundation.org to subscribe for updates. Please also, you can register in PaxMedica.com to under the family section to be able to get access to the latest information. We have some very interesting other updates coming up that I think the autism community will be very excited to hear on other projects as well as this. So please do that. But I see so many questions popping up in our chat in Q&A. So I think at this time, I want to transition, and I want to tell people we certainly will not be able to get through answering all the questions. So as I said, it's very important that you subscribe to receive our newsletter, which will have updates with the recording of today's of our chat here, so you can listen to this replay again, and also we'll try to answer some of these questions maybe through an FAQ. So please do that. And now let's break Howard for taking questions. Let me pull up the questions here and see if I can try to, or how much we can try to get through. So bear with me as I open the box to be able to do that. All right. Let's see, where is, a minute. There you go. Okay, so can you talk a little bit about the HAT, actually Buzz, if you're on. And by the way, I want to recognize Buzz Woods, who's with PaxMedica, who's also with us on the call. Buzz, I was wondering if you could ask or send me prioritize the questions for us, because there's so many. I'm just thinking perhaps you could ask, because I can't see the questions here. Oh, never mind, I got them. Okay, so there was a question here about will HAT, one second, just there. So will HAT be subject to approval in 2023 or 2024?
Not in 2023. We have to finish the trial, that HAT 301 trial, which we've just wrapped up the data part of it. Now it's going to go through statistical analysis, but 2024 is the earliest we could apply for HAT with this drug, and it will be the second half of the year.
Got it. Is there, will you be publishing the South Africa phase 2 protocol on your site?
When it's approved, it's going to be on the clinicaltrials.gov site. I don't think we'll have it on our website directly. We usually would put that on an official site that has that information. Again, what we've submitted to South Africa could change a little bit, so have to wait till that approval process gets completed, and then we'll be able to point people to clinicaltrials.gov. Got
it. Okay. And this is an interesting question. Well, what do we do if you fall off the NASDAQ?
Well, we're not going to fall off the NASDAQ, number one. Yes, there was a delisting notice that went out. We have, like a lot of small companies, struggled with the current market conditions. There are a lot of, I would say, forces out there that have taken advantage of investor, I guess, fears, and have really brutalized many stocks, ours included. But I will tell you that we don't take that lightly. So we do keep a very strong vigilance out for anybody who might be inappropriately trading our stock. But the process in terms of the NASDAQ is one that they send these notices out, and we will go and sit down with them and present our plan with them. They don't know what our plans are. They don't know how close we are to certain milestones and announcements. And once we tell them that, and we've also been able to demonstrate that we actually do meet the minimum requirements now. When the notice was sent out, we weren't, but by the time we meet with them soon in this appeal process, we're confident we will be in compliance, and therefore we'll continue on. So yes, it is very much a problem of our times, but not necessarily of our company. So we will be okay. We'll be trading on Tuesday.
Okay, all right, that's good to know. That's reassuring. But yes, and thanks for explaining how some of that works. There's questions on phase 2 trial. How many doses will it have? I know you mentioned certainly more than one, but do we know the exact number?
Well, right now, I believe it is 2 doses, but I think there's also an extension that we are trying to plan as well. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves right now, but I'll tell you, it is a minimum of 2 doses. And the reason is because what Professor Naviaux showed was on a single dose, something happened. What we had to show was, did it continue to happen on a second dose and a third dose? What we didn't necessarily know is how much time to space between doses. We didn't know exactly the dose. We also didn't know the time between doses. And that's why, for sure, there will be 2 doses. Whether there's a need for 3, I don't know yet. But at this point, we're really just trying to measure the efficacy and the amount of drug concentration in that dosing regimen, if you will, that is important.
Got it. And will there be studies that include adults? And will people have to take this Suramin for life?
Don't know any of those. Don't know about Suramin for life. We can't study adults quite yet for a couple of reasons that are related more to the work that we're doing with the FDA. I would say in the US. Overseas, maybe we could run a trial in adults. It's not clear to anybody yet whether there is a different effect in a child versus an adult with this drug. We noted some age-related differences. Efficacy in much younger children, 4 to 8 years old, seemed to be quite substantially better than in children that were older. That didn't mean it didn't work in the older children. It's just that the effect was more visible in these younger children. It was a very small N. It was a subset of the trial that we ran. And again, that's one of the reasons to run this trial in South Africa again, is see if we can concentrate that now by focusing exclusively on it, doing lots of detailed analysis around each individual's course of therapy, and then have a lot of confidence going into that bigger trial.
Got it. A lot of questions. How do I register my child for a trial?
Well, there's no trial open yet for registration, but certainly the best thing that you can do to get you on our radar is to write to us. So go on our website. There is a contact page. Go into the family section, fill out the information, and we always will respond. So every person that writes to us, we will write back to, and that's how we're going to communicate news through our community. Not everybody reads the press releases every day. Not everybody is reading scientific journals every day. So if you let us know that you'd like to hear from us, we'll make sure that you know everything that's going on as soon as it happens, including registration for trials that might be open soon. Okay.
What can you comment on? Lots of questions about cost. Anything you can say? I mean, I think that, FDA approval should hopefully help insurance to cover it, but anything else you'd want to say on the cost? There are a lot of questions on that.
Yeah, I mean, we're far away from really having that be an important thing to drive us right now. What we know is that the drugs cost today for treating the HAT indication, the human African trypanosomiasis sleeping sickness, it's free. Bayer gives it away, but they don't give away thousands of vials. They give away hundreds of vials because there aren't hundreds or thousands of patients. There's 10 patients if you're lucky a year. Actually, if you're unlucky, there's 10 patients a year. Some years there have been only 3 patients. So there is no cost of Suramin today, but you have to have sleeping sickness to get it, not the way you want to get it. When we think about the cost of the drug in the future, it's a hard thing for us to think about right now because, first of all, there will be insurance. If we demonstrate that the drug changes the behavioral outcomes of children, and that is important and matters long-term, payers will pay. And there are a lot of foundations out there also that provide family with resources for drugs that are expensive. We'll help in any way we can too. These are not inexpensive medicines to make. We're a small company. We're putting pretty much all of our resources into making the drug right now. And so for us, it's not the same as with a big drug company. We have one product. So when that product is approved, we'll come up with pricing that is a reflection of what's available for reimbursement and what is the relative value of what we have.
Yep. Okay. Can you talk about compassionate use? You mentioned it in the interview we recorded. Again, tons of questions on that. Anything else you want to add on that?
I'm sorry, you cut out just 1 second. What?
So on compassionate
compassionate use. You mean expanded access and compassion?
Yes, expanded access, yes.
Yeah. Look, I think these are both very, very important issues for us to think carefully about. We're supportive of getting help to families who can go through the process of getting expanded access for themselves. There is a process. So this isn't just calling up a pharmacy and asking for it. I don't mean to be flip about that. We will facilitate where we can. We would like to help people get access to the drug. We need the drug, and we need to be able to tell physicians the best information we know about dosing the drug in anybody. And so when we have those two things in the future, we will do everything we can to help families get it if they can't get into a clinical trial. We would like to do that. How that gets done, I don't know. There are regulations that do change sometimes. Right now, the regulations are favorable for families getting expanded use and expanded access. And I hope that they remain that way.
Got it. I just also remembered you had another press release earlier last week about Palomar Health, and I want to take this opportunity to tell all our audience members. One of our work at the Brain Foundation, one of our key priorities is to keep supporting as many treatment options. And Dr. Naviaux's work showed that in general that antipurinergic therapy has tremendous potential. And we are actually very excited to bring to you next weekend a webinar with a company called Polymar Health that is developing a natural product called Neuromodin that is likely to have very strong antipurinergic properties. And PaxMedica has been very involved as well in that work. So Howard, if you want to just tell us a little bit more about that. And I want to encourage all our audience members to make sure you register for that. If you are interested in antipurinergic therapy and access to that for your children, come listen to us, because we'll be starting a clinical trial with Polymar Health, which is the company that's developing this, very soon.
Yeah. So prior to our running a trial in autism with Suramin, we also did some preclinical work looking at other what I would call compounds. They weren't drugs yet, compounds that were known to have also an affinity for the purine receptor like Suramin does. And after a sort of a search for molecules that look like this, and then some animal studies that we ran, we came across Neuromodin as a drug a drug potential, I should say. It's a compound found in nature. It's part of rhubarb and Japanese knotweed, but I don't recommend people going out and getting rhubarb or Japanese knotweed. There are supplements that contain it. Again, we don't know anything about these supplements. That's what the Brain Foundation is going to help with, is to actually see if they can develop a proof of concept using available supplements. And with that data, we will be able to potentially generate an IND, an investigational new drug application, for a purified version of Neuromodin, and also use that in a way that that we have patented, or at least that we are applying for patents. So this is a longer term project. This would be considered to be preclinical at this point for us. It could be a phase 1 product, maybe in 2025 or 2026, provided that the Brain Foundation's work reveals a signal. And but we're very excited because it's also potentially an oral medication. And that would be exciting for us, because again, I think the question was asked earlier, would Suramin be something you would use for life? We don't know the answer to that question. And if purine antagonism or purine blocking is important, then certainly we should have different modes of doing that. We have an intranasal version of Suramin that we're working on, but having an oral version of a drug that's not Suramin, that is also active like Suramin, we think is very important for us to be evaluating right now. And that's what we're doing with Brain Foundation.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. We're very excited about this. So anybody who wants more information, please go to our website, brainfoundation.org/Neuromodin, NEUROMODIN. Gosh, we have some capital market enthusiasts in our audience. I'm moving on to the next question. This says there will be trading on Tuesday, but we want a long-term investment. The stock is being shorted, possibly with illegal naked shorting. Will you look into this issue? Otherwise, investing in the stock is not wise.
I can tell you we are looking into the issue right now. We are aware of the situation, and you will see some announcements soon on that. So I will tell you that this is not, like I said before, it's not a PaxMedica problem. This is something that's happening in the U.S. capital markets. It's an unfortunate part of our system, and but that doesn't mean we have to stand there and take it. So we do intend to do whatever is necessary to prevent our shareholders from being injured by people who are not playing by the rules.
Yeah, yeah. And will more money lead to a faster outcome?
Sometimes. I don't know if that's the case right this minute, but maybe in our future, yes. Money does make the world go round, and it drives all development. We do not make money outside of raising those funds in the public markets. We have no revenue right now. One of the things that we are hoping to get, which I think is a huge benefit for PaxMedica shareholders and for the autism community in general, is by, I think I mentioned earlier that we get a market exclusivity for Suramin, meaning that we get to be in the market by ourselves, no generics, which is unusual for a very old product, but that's only getting that through being the first applicant with the drug in the US and also with an orphan indication, which is what human African trypanosomiasis is. That's an orphan indication. So that is one part of what we get for successfully bringing the NDA and getting it approved by FDA. The other thing that we are eligible for, and we do believe we have a very good chance of getting, is a priority review voucher. This is an unusual piece of paper. It's not something you hear about every day, but there are two ways of getting a priority review voucher. And what these vouchers do is any drug company can use this voucher and go to the FDA and say, I want my product. Doesn't matter where the voucher came from. This voucher says any product reviewed right now by the FDA. You can shorten the review period by maybe 30 or 40%, which could result in 6 months more market access. In very large companies, very large molecules in large companies, $5–10 billion drugs, 6 months could be worth $1 billion to that company. These priority review vouchers are usually sold by companies like ours, and we will, if we get one, look at selling it. The sale price generally has been in the neighborhood of 100 million to 130 million. There are some exceptions, both high and low, but generally the vast majority of them, when they are sold, get sold for $100 million or more. All of that money would go into our development program at that point. So if that's a 2025 event, which we hope it will be, then that is enough, and more than enough, probably to complete phase 3 in autism. And that is how we'll accelerate our plans if we're so fortunate to be able to get the NDA approved in the first place, get that priority review voucher, and then if we decide to sell it for the most that we can. That was the sort of, if you will, the aha moment for me when I met with Michael, and he told me that this is how he had figured out how this 100-year-old drug that everybody had walked away from, how it would be possible to do something different here.
No, and this I feel is such a creative way to go about it and a way to make it faster. And we were all so disappointed because we saw Dr. Naviaux published his study and then boom, there was silence, nothing happened. And I think it's to tremendous credit to the founders of PaxMedica for finding a way to get access to the drug in Africa, to be able to find a way to get this priority review voucher and getting us to where we are. Otherwise, things could be even further delayed. I know there's a lot of angst amongst many families, and very rightfully so, who have been waiting for so long for an access to a treatment that works. And I think this is amazing what you guys did. Gosh, there are still so many questions. I think there's no way we're going to be able to get to the end of this. But what I just want to again tell people, sign up on our respective websites for information. The Brain Foundation annual Synchrony Symposium is also coming up in October from 20th to 22nd. If you want to hear the latest and the greatest in what's happening in autism research and the science to help our children, please join us. We have a fantastic agenda and set of speakers coming. I also want to thank people who have worked very hard to make this webcast available. And if Buzz Woods wouldn't mind joining us through his video, I want to give a big shout out to Buzz. He's the man here. He's the man behind late nights and doing a lot of the hard work to pull this together and to help make this happen. I also want to bring my fellow colleague and president of the Brain Foundation, Pramila, who's here with us. And if either of you want to say anything, please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to congratulate PaxMedica on getting this far. And definitely, as the president of the Brain Foundation, I will let you know that we are committed to help you in your research and getting this to its conclusion. I just wanted to also mention that we fund about 10 projects every year involving repurposed drugs, basic sciences, etc. So please help us all of you watching with fundraising. And also, as Sarika just mentioned, please join us at beautiful beachside Asilomar Monterey Bay Conference, Synchrony Symposium 2023 for many more updates of this nature, and it will be really refreshing for parents. We have a camp for families, so please join us there. So once again, thank you so much, PaxMedica, for what you do, and we are really committed to helping you. And thank you, Sarika, for doing all the hard work for this.
Of course. Buzz?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I'm responsible for communications at PaxMedica. And so I get all the incoming emails and messages
That's
and
true.
phone calls. And I just want to make clear to everybody, in case there's any question in anybody's mind, how committed we are. We are all driven to get this and make it available to you as fast as we safely and ethically can do it. We hear what you guys go through, and we want to make this work. And if anyone thinks there's any other agenda around this, there is none. Howard will tell you, our whole team does nothing but do what we can do to get this thing out there as fast as we can. The legal process of going through the FDA and getting this approved is very complicated, very time consuming. We only have so much control over how fast it happens. We're doing everything we can to get this through, believe me. So I just wanted to say that. Sarika, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it, and we hope to be on again.
Yes, absolutely. We hope to be on with the next big scoop whenever you have that for our community. So, but finally, our celebrity guest speaker, we had almost 1,000 registrations for this. So that just tells you about how much people love the work you're doing. And thank you, Howard, from the bottom of my heart, and for every parent out there that I have spoken to, and so many of them, for the amazing work you're doing. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for making time. And let's plan on that next update soon too.
Indeed. Thank you so much. I mean, we really do appreciate everything that Brain Foundation has done for us, and we look forward to many years of working together. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. With that, we come to the end of this. We will have the recording of this event be made available at some point in the future to all registered attendees. So don't fret that you haven't received it. We'll get it to you as soon as we can. And don't forget to join us at our webinar next weekend for another antipurinergic compound likely. So see you all then.
Bye-bye.